After returning from my husband's funeral, I overheard my daughter-in-law whispering, "She is next." The words hit me like ice water in my veins. I stood there, frozen in my own hallway, wondering if I had just heard my own death sentence. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 75 years old. I live in a 3-story brownstone in Brooklyn that Robert and I bought in 1978, when the neighborhood was rough around the edges, and we were young enough to believe we could fix anything. The morning light still filters through the same lace curtains I hung 42 years ago, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floors that Robert refinished with his own hands. Every morning I wake up at 6:30 sharp. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Robert used to say I was more reliable than his grandfather's pocket watch. I'd brew Colombian coffee in the same blue ceramic pot we received as a wedding gift, and the rich aroma would mix with the lingering scent of his cologne. Chanel pour Monsieur. Even now, 6 months after his funeral, I can still catch traces of it on his favorite armchair. But that morning after the funeral was different. The house felt colder somehow. The familiar creaks and sighs of our old brownstone sounded like whispers of warning. Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare, because my story didn't start with Megan's cruel words in the hallway. It started 43 years ago when I first held my son David in my arms and promised him I would love him unconditionally forever. That promise would come back to haunt me in ways I never imagined. David was my miracle baby. Robert and I had tried for years to have children. We'd gone through fertility treatments, heartbreaking miscarriages, and sleepless nights wondering if we'd ever become parents. When David finally arrived, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect, I thought my heart might burst from joy. I remember his first steps in this very living room, right by the fireplace where Robert would sit reading the newspaper every Sunday morning. I remember his first day of school, how he cried and clung to my dress, and how I stood at the kitchen window watching him walk up the street until he disappeared around the corner. I remember teaching him to ride a bicycle in Prospect Park, running behind him with my hand on the small of his back, promising I wouldn't let go even though I already had. David grew up to be everything Robert and I had hoped for. He was smart, graduating from Columbia with a degree in business administration. He was ambitious, landing a job at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan right out of college. He was handsome, with Robert's strong jawline and my green eyes. When he brought Megan home for the first time 8 years ago, I was thrilled. Megan seemed perfect for David. She was beautiful, with silky blonde hair and the kind of smile that could light up a room. She worked in marketing for a boutique firm in Soho, and she spoke passionately about her dreams of starting her own agency someday. She laughed at Robert's terrible jokes and complimented my cooking, even going so far as to ask for my recipe for Sunday pot roast. "He's a keeper," Robert whispered to me that first night as we watched David walk her to her car. "Look how happy our boy is." And David was happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. They moved in together within 6 months, got engaged a year later, and married in a beautiful ceremony at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I wore my best pearl necklace, the one Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, and I cried tears of joy as I watched my son promise to love and honor this woman for the rest of his life. I opened my heart to Megan completely. She wasn't just my daughter-in-law, she was the daughter I'd never had. When she and David struggled to find an apartment they could afford in Manhattan, I co-signed their lease without hesitation. When Megan's marketing firm downsized and she lost her job, I withdrew $15,000 from my savings account to help them cover their rent until she found something new. "You don't have to do this, Mom," David had said, but I could see the relief in his eyes. "Family takes care of family," I told him, echoing the words my own mother had said to me so many years before. That's what love is. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the moment everything started to change. The moment money entered the equation and transformed love into something transactional. But at the time, all I could see was my son's gratitude and Megan's tears of relief. The requests for help became more frequent after that. David called one Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. Their car had broken down and they needed $3,000 for repairs. 2 months later, it was Megan's credit card debt, accumulated during her period of unemployment. $5,000 this time. "It's just until I get back on my feet," she promised, her blue eyes wide and sincere. "I'll pay you back every penny, I swear." I never asked for the money back. Family doesn't charge interest, I told myself. Family doesn't keep score. But maybe I should have been keeping score because the pattern was becoming clear to everyone except me. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, from 2 doors down, mentioned it one afternoon as we both tended our small front gardens. "Eleanor, dear, you're so generous with that boy of yours," she said, her voice carefully neutral. I hope he appreciates everything you do. Did he appreciate it? I thought he did. David still called every Sunday, still brought Megan over for dinner once a month, still remembered my birthday and Mother's Day. But there was something different in the way he looked at me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was as if he saw me not as his mother, but as a resource to be managed. The shift became more apparent after Megan got pregnant with their first child. Suddenly, every conversation was about what they needed for the baby. A crib, a stroller, a car seat, maternity clothes, doctor's bills not covered by insurance. Each request was delivered with the same earnest explanation about tight budgets and unexpected expenses. And each time I found myself reaching for my checkbook. "You're going to spoil that baby rotten," Robert would tease. But I could see the concern in his eyes. We'd worked hard all our lives to build up our savings. Robert had been a foreman at the Navy Yard for 37 years, and I'd worked part-time at a local bookstore while raising David. We'd invested wisely, putting money into stocks and even some Bitcoin when our financial advisor suggested diversifying our portfolio. We were comfortable, but we weren't wealthy by Manhattan standards. Little Emma was born on a snowy February morning, and when David placed her in my arms for the first time, all my financial worries melted away. She was perfect. Tiny fingers that gripped mine with surprising strength, dark hair like David's, eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered to her. "I'm your Grandma Eleanor, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Being a grandmother changed everything for me. Emma became the center of my universe. I babysat whenever Megan needed to work late. I bought clothes and toys and books, creating a nursery in our spare bedroom so Emma could stay overnight. I photographed every milestone, every smile, every precious moment. 2 years later, when little Oliver was born, my joy doubled. 2 beautiful grandchildren who called me Gamma and ran to me with open arms whenever they visited. I would have given them anything, done anything for them. And that's exactly what Megan and David learned to count on. The requests for financial help never stopped. In fact, they increased. David called it investing in the family's future. When he wanted to switch to a more expensive apartment in a better school district, I helped with the security deposit. When Megan decided to start her own marketing consultancy, I provided the startup capital. When they needed a down payment for a house in New Jersey, I liquidated some of my investment portfolio. "It's just a loan," David assured me each time. "We'll pay you back with interest." But the promises of repayment became as empty as my savings account. There was always another crisis, another emergency, another opportunity that required immediate financial intervention. And each time I hesitated, Megan had a way of making me feel guilty. "I guess we'll just have to tell the kids they can't go to that summer camp," she'd say with a sigh. "Or maybe we'll have to move to a cheaper neighborhood with worse schools." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. I couldn't bear the thought of my grandchildren suffering because I was being selfish with money I couldn't take with me to the grave anyway. Robert tried to talk sense into me more than once. "Eleanor, honey, we need to think about our own future," he said one evening as I wrote another check. "We're not getting any younger, and if one of us gets sick..." He never got to finish that thought. 6 months ago, Robert suffered a massive stroke while working in his small garden behind the house. One moment he was planting tomatoes, humming an old Beatles song under his breath, and the next moment he was collapsed on the ground, unable to speak or move. The ambulance ride to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I held Robert's hand, watching his face contort as he struggled to communicate something important to me. His eyes were wide with fear and frustration, and I could see him fighting to form words that wouldn't come. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, stroking his silver hair. "Don't try to talk. Just rest. Everything's going to be fine." But everything wasn't fine. Robert spent 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by 2 months in rehabilitation, slowly learning to speak and walk again. The medical bills were staggering, even with Medicare and our supplemental insurance. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, medications, special equipment for the house. Where was my family during this crisis? David visited exactly twice in 3 weeks. Megan sent flowers once. They were both incredibly busy with work, they explained. David's investment firm was going through a merger, and Megan's consultancy was at a crucial stage. They couldn't afford to take time off. I spent those months alone with Robert, watching him struggle to regain pieces of the man he used to be. Some days were better than others. He would squeeze my hand and smile, and for a moment I would see glimpses of the Robert I'd fallen in love with 50 years ago. Other days were heartbreaking. He would forget words or become frustrated when his body wouldn't cooperate with his mind. "Eleanor," he said one afternoon, his speech still slow and careful. "Promise me something." "Anything," I said, adjusting his pillows. Don't let them take advantage of you when I'm gone." "You're not going anywhere," I protested, but he shook his head. "Promise me," he insisted, gripping my hand with what little strength he had recovered. I promised, not knowing that within a month I would understand exactly what he meant. Robert died quietly in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in March. I found him when I brought his breakfast tray, peaceful and still, with the faintest smile on his lips. The paramedics said it was another stroke, quick and painless. He simply went to sleep and didn't wake up. The grief was overwhelming. 50 years of marriage don't end easily. 50 years of shared breakfasts and inside jokes and comfortable silences. 50 years of being half of a whole, only to suddenly find yourself entirely alone. I wandered through our house like a ghost, touching his favorite coffee mug, smelling his cologne on his clothes, listening for his footsteps on the stairs. David took charge of the funeral arrangements, which I was grateful for at the time. I was too numb with grief to make decisions about flowers and caskets and memorial services. Megan helped with the obituary and the reception, organizing everything with the kind of efficiency she brought to her marketing campaigns. The funeral was held at Greenwood Cemetery, where Robert and I had walked so many Sunday afternoons over the years. It was a gray, drizzly day, the kind of weather that matched the darkness in my heart. About 50 people attended. Robert's old colleagues from the Navy Yard, neighbors from our block, a few distant relatives, and David's small family. I stood beside the grave in my black dress and Robert's favorite pearls, holding Emma's small hand on one side and Oliver's on the other. My grandchildren were confused by the solemnity of the occasion, and I found myself comforting them instead of focusing on my own grief. "Where did Grandpa go?" Emma asked in her clear 5-year-old voice. "He went to heaven, sweetheart," I told her, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Heaven seemed very far away on that cold, wet March afternoon. The reception was held at our house afterward. People filled the living room and kitchen, sharing stories about Robert and offering their condolences. Mrs. Alvarez from the apartment downstairs brought a beautiful arrangement of white lilies and stayed to help serve coffee and sandwiches. She was a retired nurse, a sturdy woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gentle hands. "If you need anything at all," she told me as she washed dishes in my kitchen, "I'm just one floor down. Don't hesitate to knock on my door." I was touched by her kindness, especially since most of the other guests seemed uncomfortable with my grief. Death makes people awkward. They don't know what to say, so they say nothing, or they offer meaningless platitudes about time healing all wounds and Robert being in a better place. As the afternoon wore on, people began to leave. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from accepting condolences and pretending to be stronger than I felt. I had retreated to the kitchen to take a moment alone when I heard voices in the hallway just outside the door. "Won't last much longer living alone in this big house," Megan was saying in a low voice. "He's getting frail, and at her age—" "Mom's tougher than she looks," David replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "David, be realistic. She can barely take care of herself. Did you see how lost she looked today? And this house is worth at least $800,000 now, maybe more with the way Brooklyn real estate is going." My heart began to pound. I pressed myself against the kitchen door, straining to hear every word. "What are you suggesting?" David asked. "I'm just saying we need to start thinking practically. Your mother has been incredibly generous over the years, helping us out financially, but she's not going to be around forever. We need to make sure she's comfortable in her final years." The way Megan said comfortable sent chills down my spine. "And this house is just too much for her now," she continued. "Maybe it's time to start looking at assisted living facilities. Somewhere nice, of course, but more appropriate for her age and situation." "I don't know, Megan. She loves this house. Dad and Mom lived here for over 40 years. That's exactly my point. It's full of memories that are just going to make her sadder. A fresh start might be exactly what she needs. And David, think about Emma and Oliver. They're going to need college funds, and the real estate market is hot right now. If we wait too long—" There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for my son to defend me, to tell his wife that his mother's home and autonomy were not topics for casual financial planning. Instead, I heard him say, "You might be right. Let me think about how to bring it up with her." "Don't wait too long," Megan said, and then her voice dropped to an even lower whisper. "Honestly, David, at her age and with her heart condition, she could go any time. She is next. She is next." Those 3 words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to keep from falling, my legs suddenly weak beneath me. They weren't talking about moving me to assisted living out of concern for my well-being. They were talking about waiting for me to die so they could inherit my house. My heart condition. I'd had a minor episode 2 years ago, nothing serious according to my cardiologist, but apparently serious enough for my daughter-in-law to factor into her financial planning. The casual way she said it, as if my death was just another line item on her business agenda, made my blood turn to ice. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the last of the funeral guests say their goodbyes and leave. When the house finally fell silent, I emerged from the kitchen on unsteady legs. David and Megan were in the living room, cleaning up paper plates and coffee cups. They looked up when I appeared, and for a moment I saw something in their expressions that I'd never noticed before. Not love, not even affection. It was the look you might give a problem you needed to solve. "Mom, you look tired," David said, his voice carefully concerned. "Why don't you go rest? We can finish cleaning up." "Thank you," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "That's very thoughtful." As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I heard Megan whisper something else to David, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I had heard enough. That night, I lay in the bed I'd shared with Robert for 43 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what I'd learned. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just hoping for my death. They were planning for it. They had reduced me to a financial asset to be managed and eventually liquidated. How long had they been thinking this way? I wondered. How many of those recent visits had been motivated not by love, but by the desire to assess my declining health and increasing vulnerability? How many of those requests for financial help had been tests to see how much they could extract from me before I became suspicious? I thought about all the money I'd given them over the years. The co-sign lease, the rent payments, the car repairs, the credit card debt, the business startup, the down payment on their house. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. I'd never kept an exact tally because I'd never thought of it as debt. It was love, I'd told myself. It was family taking care of family. But now I realized it hadn't been love at all. It had been a long-term investment strategy, with my death as the expected return. The next few weeks passed in a blur of grief and growing awareness. I began to notice things I'd previously overlooked. The way Megan's eyes lingered on my jewelry box when she visited. The questions David asked about my will and my financial advisor. The casual comments about how difficult it must be for me to maintain such a large house on my own. They visited more frequently after the funeral, always with reasonable explanations. They were worried about me. They wanted to make sure I was eating enough. They thought I might be lonely, but I could see the assessment in their eyes, calculating my decline like actuaries pricing a life insurance policy. "Mom, have you thought about updating your will?" David asked one Sunday afternoon as we sat in the living room. "I mean, now that Dad's gone, you might want to make sure everything is in order." "My will is fine," I said carefully. "But when was the last time you reviewed it? Estate law changes, and you want to make sure Emma and Oliver are taken care of if something happens to you." Always the grandchildren. They knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. I loved Emma and Oliver desperately, and of course I wanted them to be provided for. But I was beginning to understand that David and Megan saw them as leverage in their campaign to secure my assets. "I'll think about it," I said, which seemed to satisfy them for the moment. But I did more than think about it. The next week, I made an appointment with my lawyer, Harold Goldstein, a man Robert and I had known for 20 years. His office was in Brooklyn Heights, in one of those old brownstone buildings that reminded me of my own neighborhood. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry for your loss," Harold said when I arrived for our meeting. "Robert was a good man." "Thank you, Harold. That's actually why I'm here. I want to review my will and make sure everything is properly arranged." Harold pulled out my file and we went through it page by page. My house would go to David, along with the bulk of my financial assets. There were smaller bequests for Emma and Oliver's education funds, and a charitable donation to the Brooklyn Public Library where I'd volunteered for many years. "This all looks standard," Harold said. "Is there something specific you're concerned about?" I hesitated, uncertain how to articulate my growing suspicions without sounding paranoid. "Harold, hypothetically speaking, what would prevent someone from pressuring an elderly person to make changes to their will?" Harold's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious concern, Eleanor. Elder financial abuse is more common than people think. Are you feeling pressured by someone?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe. I just want to make sure that if I ever do make changes, they're genuinely my choice, and not the result of manipulation or coercion." We talked for another hour about safeguards and warning signs. Harold explained various legal protections available to elderly clients, including the option to create a revocable trust that would be harder for family members to challenge or influence. "The most important thing," he said as our meeting concluded, "is that you trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your instincts." Those words echoed in my mind as I walked home through Brooklyn Heights. What were my instincts telling me? That my son and daughter-in-law saw me as a financial opportunity rather than a family member? That they were waiting for me to die so they could inherit my house and whatever money I had left? But surely I was being paranoid. These were the people I'd loved and supported for years. David was my son, my miracle baby. Megan was like a daughter to me. They had small children and financial pressures. It was natural for them to be concerned about inheritance and estate planning, except that it wasn't concern I'd heard in Megan's voice that day after the funeral. It was calculation. Cold, mercenary calculation. I decided to test my theory. A few days later, I called David and told him I wasn't feeling well. I mentioned chest pains and shortness of breath, symptoms that I knew would alarm him given my previous heart episode. Should I call 911? He asked, and for a moment I heard genuine worry in his voice. No, I think I'm okay now, I said. But it scared me. I've been thinking about what you said about updating my will. Maybe we should make an appointment with Harold. That's a good idea, Mom. Do you want me to come with you? Would you? I'd feel more comfortable having you there. Of course. Let me check my calendar and I'll call Harold's office. Within 24 hours, David had arranged an appointment for the following week. His efficiency was impressive, I had to admit, almost as if he'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The morning of our appointment, David arrived at my house wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he usually reserved for important business meetings. He helped me into his car with exaggerated care, asking repeatedly if I was comfortable and if the seatbelt was too tight. I've been thinking about your situation, Mom, he said as we drove toward Brooklyn Heights. Megan and I both have. This house is getting to be too much for you to handle alone. I manage fine, I said. But for how much longer? The stairs are steep, the maintenance is expensive, and you're not getting any younger. We've been looking at some really nice assisted living communities, places where you'd have help with daily activities but still maintain your independence. Assisted living communities, just as Megan had suggested in that conversation I'd overheard. I'm not ready for assisted living, David. I know, but it's something to think about for the future. And in the meantime, we could help you manage the financial side of things. Make sure your money is invested properly and that you're not being taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial advisors. Unscrupulous financial advisors. That was rich coming from someone who worked at an investment firm and had been systematically extracting money from his elderly mother for years. My finances are fine, I said firmly. I'm sure they are. But you've been handling everything alone since Dad died, and that's a lot of stress. Megan and I could take some of that burden off your shoulders. Take some of that burden off my shoulders. Another way of saying they wanted control of my money while I was still alive, rather than waiting for me to die. When we arrived at Harold's office, David immediately took charge of the conversation. Harold, good to see you. Mom's been having some health concerns lately, and we want to make sure her affairs are in order. Of course, Harold said, glancing at me. Eleanor, what specifically would you like to review? Before I could answer, David jumped in. Well, the house is really too big for Mom now, and the maintenance costs are eating into her savings. We're thinking it might make sense to transfer ownership to me so I can handle the upkeep and property taxes. That way Mom wouldn't have to worry about any of that. Harold's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands still on his legal pad. That's a significant decision, he said carefully. Eleanor, is that something you've been considering? I looked at my son, sitting forward in his chair with eager anticipation, and suddenly everything became clear. This wasn't about my well-being or my comfort. This was about securing the biggest asset in my estate while I was still alive and presumably still capable of making legal decisions. I need to think about it, I said. David's face fell slightly. Mom, you don't have to decide today. But Harold can draw up the paperwork so it's ready when you are. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I think I'd like to schedule a separate appointment to discuss this privately with Harold, just to make sure I understand all my options. For the first time since we'd entered the office, David looked genuinely surprised. Mom, I'm just trying to help. We're family. There's nothing you can't discuss in front of me. I appreciate that, David, but this is my decision to make, and I want to make sure I'm fully informed before I make it. The ride home was tense. David kept asking if he'd said something wrong, if I was angry with him, if I was feeling overwhelmed by the legal complexities. I gave him non-committal answers and stared out the window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood. When we pulled up in front of my house, I noticed Megan's car parked across the street. She was waiting for us, probably expecting to hear that the house transfer had been successfully initiated. How did it go? She asked as soon as I got out of David's car. Fine, I said. We discussed several options. What kind of options? She pressed. Various ways to structure the estate planning, David said, his voice tight with frustration. Mom wants to think about it. I could see the disappointment in both their faces. They had expected this to be a formality, a rubber stamp on a decision they'd already made for me. Instead, they were learning that I still had a mind of my own. That evening, after David and Megan left, I sat in Robert's old armchair and tried to process what had happened. My son had just attempted to manipulate me into signing over my house to him, not in some distant future when I was no longer capable of living independently, but right now, while I was still healthy and competent. The betrayal was breathtaking. I had spent years sacrificing for this young man, emptying my savings to support his lifestyle and ambitions, and this was how he repaid me, by trying to trick me into giving him the roof over my head. I thought about Robert's warning, "Don't let them take advantage of you when I'm gone." He had seen this coming. Perhaps he'd noticed things I'd been too trusting to recognize. The way David's requests for money had become more frequent and demanding. The way Megan assessed our possessions with calculating eyes. The way they both treated me less like a beloved family member and more like a financial asset to be managed. That night, I made a decision. I would not be anyone's victim. I would not be manipulated, coerced, or rushed into decisions that benefited others at my expense. If David and Megan wanted my money and my house, they would have to wait until I was actually dead to get them. And I intended to live for a very long time. The next morning, I called Harold and scheduled a private appointment for the following week. I also called my financial advisor, Patricia Williams, a sharp woman in her 50s who had been managing Roberts and my investments for the past decade. "Patricia, I need you to help me understand exactly what my financial situation is," I said. "I want a complete picture of all my assets, investments, and income streams." "Of course, Eleanor. Are you thinking about making some changes?" "Possibly. I want to make sure I'm in control of my own financial future." Patricia's office was in a gleaming Manhattan high-rise, the kind of place that made me feel slightly intimidated despite having been a client for years. But Patricia herself was warm and reassuring as she walked me through my portfolio. The numbers were better than I'd expected. Despite all the money I'd given to David and Megan over the years, Robert and I had accumulated substantial wealth. Our house was worth at least $800,000, as Megan had correctly assessed. Our investment portfolio, including stocks, bonds, and yes, even some Bitcoin that had appreciated considerably, was worth another $600,000. I had a pension from my years working at the bookstore, Social Security, and Robert's Navy Yard pension that continued to pay out to me as his widow. "You're in excellent financial shape," Patricia assured me. "With proper management, your money should last well into your 90s, even if you need expensive medical care or assisted living at some point, well into my 90s. I was 75 now, which meant I potentially had 20 more years of independence ahead of me, 20 more years of living in my beloved brownstone, of tending my small garden, of volunteering at the library, of being myself rather than the compliant elderly victim my son and daughter-in-law seemed to expect. But only if I protected myself from their financial manipulation. Patricia, hypothetically speaking, what would be the best way to ensure that my money is used for my own care and comfort, rather than being diverted to other purposes?" Patricia's expression sharpened. "Are you concerned about financial elder abuse, Eleanor?" "I'm concerned about family members who might have different priorities than my own well-being." We discussed various strategies. Revocable trust that would be harder to challenge. Direct payment arrangements for my own care that would bypass family members entirely. Legal safeguards that would prevent anyone from pressuring me to make financial decisions I wasn't comfortable with. "The key thing to remember," Patricia said, "is that this is your money. You earned it, you saved it, and you have the right to spend it on your own needs and desires. Nobody else's financial situation is your responsibility." Nobody else's financial situation is your responsibility. Those words hit me like a revelation. For years, I had felt responsible for David's career, his marriage, his children's future, even Megan's business dreams. I had emptied my savings because I thought it was my duty as a mother and grandmother to ensure their financial security. But what about my own security? What about my own dreams and desires? I was 75 years old, not 95. I was healthy, alert, and capable of making my own decisions. Why should I impoverish myself to enrich people who were already middle-class professionals with their own incomes? More importantly, why should I reward people who saw me as nothing more than an eventual inheritance? That week, I began to make changes. Small ones at first, because I wasn't quite ready for the confrontation I knew was coming. I opened a new checking account that David and Megan didn't know about and transferred most of my liquid assets into it. I changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies to include Emma and Oliver directly, rather than leaving everything to David to manage on their behalf. I also began to pay attention to the subtle ways my family had been manipulating me. David's phone calls always seemed to include casual mentions of financial stress. Megan would sigh dramatically about the cost of the children's activities or their mortgage payments. The grandchildren were coached to mention things they wanted but couldn't afford. "Gamma, I really want to take piano lessons, but Mommy says they're too expensive," Emma said during one visit, her blue eyes wide and innocent. "Maybe Gamma could help with that," Megan said quickly, ruffling Emma's hair. You know how much she loves music. I did love music. But I was beginning to understand that Emma's piano lessons were less important to Megan than establishing the precedent that Gamma's wallet was always available for the children's enrichment. Piano lessons are a wonderful idea, I said carefully. You should ask your parents to budget for them. Megan's smile faltered slightly. Well, with David's student loans and my business expenses, extra lessons aren't really in our budget right now. Then perhaps it's something to save up for, I suggested. It's good for children to learn that we can't have everything we want immediately. The room fell silent. David and Megan exchanged a look that I interpreted as surprise that I wasn't automatically reaching for my checkbook. Of course, Megan said after a moment. We're just so grateful for everything you've already done for us, Eleanor. You've been so generous over the years. Grateful, but not grateful enough to stop asking for more. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. My family had expected a predictable response to their financial hint, and instead, they'd gotten something else entirely. They were recalibrating, trying to figure out what had changed. What had changed was that I'd stopped seeing myself as responsible for their financial security. What had changed was that I'd started asking myself some hard questions about the nature of love versus transaction. What had changed was that I'd begun to value my own rights and needs as much as I valued theirs. But the biggest change was still to come. 2 weeks later, David called with what he described as a family emergency. His voice was tense and urgent in a way I'd rarely heard. Mom, I need to see you right away. Can I come over tonight? What's wrong? Is it one of the children? No, Emma and Oliver are fine. It's a financial situation. I'll explain when I get there. He arrived within an hour, alone and clearly agitated. He'd been drinking, I realized, though he was trying to hide it. Mom, I'm going to be straight with you because we're family and I trust you completely, he began, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. I made a bad investment. A really bad investment. I put money into what I thought was a sure thing, and it turned out to be a scam. How much money? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. $50,000. $50,000. More money than I'd ever given them in a single transaction. David, where did you get $50,000 to invest? He couldn't meet my eyes. I borrowed against our house. I was so confident it would pay off that I figured we could pay back the loan and still have money left over for Emma and Oliver's college funds. And now? Now the money's gone and we have to repay the loan in 90 days or the bank will foreclose on our house. The manipulation was so obvious it was almost insulting. David had created a crisis that threatened his children's home, making it impossible for me to refuse to help without appearing heartless. He'd even included specific details about the 90-day deadline to create urgency and prevent me from taking time to think the situation through. But something about his story didn't add up. David, you work for an investment firm. You understand financial risk better than most people. How could you fall for a scam? It wasn't obviously a scam, he said defensively. It was presented by people I trusted, with documentation that looked legitimate. These things happen even to professionals. What kind of investment was it? Does it matter? The point is that Megan and I are about to lose our house, and Emma and Oliver will have to change schools, and all their stability will be gone. The children again. Always the children. David, have you talked to your bank about restructuring the loan? Or to a financial counselor about other options? Mom, there are no other options. We need $50,000 in 87 days. 87 days. He'd even counted down the days to make the crisis seem more real. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. He wasn't having a financial emergency. He was running a con game on his own mother. David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Of course. How much money have I given you and Megan over the years? He shifted uncomfortably. I don't know exactly. You've been incredibly generous, and we're grateful for every penny. I want you to guess. Ballpark figure. Mom, why does that matter right now? This is about the future, not the past. Humor me. He was quiet for a long moment, calculating in his head. Maybe 20,000? 25? Try 65,000, I said quietly. His face went white. That can't be right. Actually, it might be more. I started keeping track after your father's funeral, and that's just what I could document from bank records. It doesn't include things like the security deposits and co-signed leases and all the times I paid for groceries and utilities and clothes for the children. Mom, I had no idea it was that much. No idea? Or no intention of ever paying it back? We always planned to pay you back. You know that. When? You've been saying that for 8 years, David. When exactly were you planning to start repaying the $65,000 you owe me? He couldn't answer. We sat in silence for several minutes. the weight of 8 years of financial manipulation hanging between us. Finally, I spoke again. David, I'm not giving you $50,000. But Mom, the house is not my responsibility. You're a grown man with a college education and a good job. If you made a bad financial decision, the consequences are yours to bear. I can't believe you're saying this. After everything we've been through as a family. After everything we've been through as a family, I can't believe you'd ask me for more money after taking $65,000 and never paying back a penny. David stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Fine. I guess I know where I stand now. I guess blood doesn't mean anything when it comes to money. You're right, I said calmly. Blood doesn't mean anything when it comes to money. Family shouldn't be about money at all. It should be about love and respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. And you don't think I care about your well-being? The question hung in the air between us. This was the moment of truth, the moment when I could either retreat back into comfortable denial or speak the reality I'd been avoiding for weeks. David, the day of your father's funeral, I heard you and Megan discussing my death as if it were a real estate opportunity. His face went from red to gray. What are you talking about? I heard Megan say that I wouldn't last much longer and that this house was worth $800,000. I heard her say that I am next. Mom, you misunderstood. I heard you agree with her about moving me to assisted living so you could sell my house. That's not... We were just being practical about the future. Whose future, David? Mine or yours? He couldn't answer that question either. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. Mom, please, let's talk about this rationally. I am being rational. For the first time in years, I'm being completely rational. You and Megan have been treating me like a walking ATM machine, and now you're disappointed that the machine is out of order. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 8 years taking money from your elderly mother while secretly planning to inherit her house. What's not fair is creating fake financial emergencies to manipulate me into giving you even more money. What's not fair is reducing your own mother to a dollar figure in your retirement plans. David stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time as well. Not as a resource to be managed, but as a person with her own thoughts and feelings and rights. I never meant for it to be this way, he said finally, but this is the way it became. And now, it stops. After David left, I sat in my living room for hours, replaying the conversation in my mind. I felt simultaneously heartbroken and liberated. Heartbroken because I'd finally acknowledged the truth about my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. Liberated because I'd finally stood up for myself and set boundaries I should have established years ago. The next few days were quiet. David didn't call. Megan didn't stop by. I wondered if they were regrouping, planning a new strategy, or if they were finally accepting that their financial manipulation had come to an end. On Thursday morning, I was working in my small garden when I heard a knock at my door. I expected it to be one of my neighbors, but when I opened the door, I found Emma and Oliver standing on my front steps. Gamma! Emma threw her arms around my waist. We missed you. Mommy said we could visit you while she runs errands, Oliver explained, his gap-toothed grin lighting up his whole face. I looked past them and saw Megan's car idling at the curb. She waved at me through the windshield but didn't get out. Of course you can visit, I told the children, though alarm bells were ringing in my head. Using the grandchildren as emotional leverage was a new low, even for Megan. Emma and Oliver spent the afternoon with me, playing board games and helping me bake cookies. They were delightful company as always, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their visit had been orchestrated for maximum emotional impact. When Megan returned to collect them, she finally got out of her car and approached my front door. Eleanor, I hope it was okay that I dropped them off like this. I had some appointments in the city, and you know how much they love spending time with you. It's always wonderful to see them, I said carefully. Good, because they love you so much, and David and I would hate for anything to interfere with their relationship with their grandmother. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Behave yourself, or you'll lose access to your grandchildren. I love them too, I said. Very much. I know you do, and I know you want what's best for them. What's best for them. Another way of saying that my financial support was essential for their well-being. Megan, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Do you and David actually want a relationship with me, or do you just want my money? The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her carefully composed expression slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. Eleanor, I can't believe you'd ask such a thing. We love you. Your family. Then why does every conversation we have eventually turn to money? It doesn't. The piano lessons, the house repairs, the business expenses, David's supposed investment scam. It's always something that requires me to write a check. Megan's mask slipped further. You make it sound like we're using you, but that's not how family works. Family helps each other. You're right. Family does help each other. But help should flow both ways. When was the last time you or David helped me with anything? Megan was quiet for a moment, apparently searching her memory for examples of assistance they'd provided. We helped plan Robert's funeral, she said finally. You organized a reception that I paid for. We visit regularly to make sure you're okay. You visit regularly to assess whether I'm lonely or vulnerable enough to make financial decisions in your favor. That's not true. Then why did you tell David that I am next? Megan's face froze. I never said that. I heard you, Megan. The day of Robert's funeral, in my own hallway, you discussed my death as if it were a business opportunity. You misunderstood what you heard. Did I? Then explain to me what you meant when you said this house is worth $800,000 and I could go anytime. Megan straightened her shoulders, and for the first time in our 8-year relationship, she dropped all pretense of affection. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. You're 75 years old, Eleanor. You have a heart condition. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you, and you're not getting any younger. David and I have been trying to be respectful about it. But the reality is that you're going to need help eventually. And when that time comes, somebody's going to have to make decisions about your care and your assets. And you've decided that somebody should be you and David. We're your family. Who else is it going to be? Maybe me, I said quietly. You? Maybe I'm going to make decisions about my own care and my own assets. Megan laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Eleanor, be realistic. You barely left this house during Robert's illness. You can't even program your own television remote. Do you really think you're capable of managing complex financial and medical decisions? The condescension in her voice was breathtaking. This was how she really saw me, as someone too old and incompetent to manage her own life. I think I'm more capable than you give me credit for, I said. Look, I understand that this is hard for you. Nobody wants to admit they're losing their independence, but David and I are trying to help you transition into this next phase of life with dignity. By planning to put me in assisted living so you can sell my house, by making sure you get appropriate care while preserving your assets for Emma and Oliver's future. There it was. The truth beneath all the manipulation and false concern. They weren't trying to take care of me, they were trying to take care of my money. What if I want to spend my own money on my own care and comfort? What if I want to travel or remodel this house or donate to charity? What if I want to live here until I die and let someone else worry about Emma and Oliver's college funds? Megan's composure cracked completely. Then you'd be selfish and irresponsible. You'd be wasting resources that could benefit your own grandchildren. My own grandchildren have 2 college-educated parents with good incomes. They'll be fine without my money. That's easy for you to say. You don't have to worry about college costs or health insurance or the hundreds of other expenses that come with raising children. Actually, I did worry about those things for 22 years while I was raising David, and somehow we managed without taking money from his grandparents. Times were different then. Times are always different. But financial responsibility is still financial responsibility. Megan gathered Emma and Oliver, her movements sharp and angry. I think we're done here, she said. I think we are. As their car pulled away from the curb, I felt a profound sense of loss. Not for Megan, whose true nature I'd finally seen clearly, but for the relationship I'd thought we had. For 8 years, I'd believed I was helping a young woman who genuinely cared about me. Instead, I'd been funding someone who saw me as an obstacle to her financial security. But I also felt something else. Relief. The pretense was finally over. The manipulation had been exposed. I no longer had to wonder why my family's affection felt conditional, because now I knew it was. That evening, I called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment to revise my will. I also called Patricia and asked her to help me establish a revocable trust that would ensure my money was used for my own care, not for anyone else's convenience. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Patricia asked. These changes will make it much more difficult for your family to access your assets, even in an emergency. I'm sure. My family has had access to my assets for 8 years. It's time for me to have access to them. The process took several weeks, but when it was complete, I felt like I'd reclaimed something essential that I'd lost without realizing it. My autonomy. My right to make decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than other people's expectations. David called a few times during those weeks, ostensibly to check on my health, but really to test whether I'd changed my mind about the $50,000 he claimed to need. When it became clear that I hadn't, the calls stopped. I didn't hear from any of them for over a month. Then, on a warm afternoon in late May, I was browsing at the farmers market near Grand Army Plaza when I ran into Mrs. Patterson, a woman from our church who had always been friendly with Megan. Eleanor, dear, how are you holding up? She asked with the kind of exaggerated sympathy people use when they think they know something you don't. I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. I have to say, I admire your strength during this difficult time. What difficult time? Mrs. Patterson looked confused. The family situation, with David and Megan having to sell their house? My blood went cold. They're selling their house? Oh dear. I thought you knew. Megan mentioned it at book club last week. She said they were having to downsize because of some financial troubles, and that it was especially hard because you weren't able to help them the way you used to. The way I used to. As if my previous financial support had been a regular income stream that I'd arbitrarily cut off. Did she say anything else? I asked. Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. Well, she did mention that you'd been different since Robert passed. More isolated and suspicious. She seemed very concerned about you. Isolated and suspicious. Megan was creating a narrative that portrayed me as an eccentric, paranoid widow who'd turned against her own family. She was laying the groundwork for people to doubt my competence and judgment. Thank you for telling me, I said. When I got home, I called Patricia immediately. I need to make sure my estate planning documents are foolproof, I told her. I think my family is going to challenge my competency. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's a serious accusation, Eleanor. It's a serious situation. They're already spreading rumors that I'm becoming isolated and suspicious. If something happens to me, they'll probably claim I wasn't in my right mind when I made changes to my will. Do you have any documentation of their financial requests over the years? Some. Bank records, canceled checks, emails. Good. And have you had a recent medical evaluation that demonstrates your mental competency? Not recently. I'd recommend getting one. A clean bill of mental health from your doctor will make it much harder for anyone to challenge your decisions later. I made an appointment with Dr. Richards, my physician of 37 years, for a complete physical and cognitive assessment. At 83, Dr. R. Richards was only 8 years older than me, and he'd known me long enough to serve as a credible witness to my mental state. Eleanor, you're as sharp as you've ever been, he assured me after putting me through a series of tests. Your memory is excellent, your judgment is sound, and your decision-making abilities are completely intact. Anyone who suggests otherwise is mistaken or lying. I asked him to document his assessment in writing and send copies to both Patricia and Harold. I was building a paper trail that would protect me from any future claims of incompetency. But even as I took these practical steps, I was struggling with the emotional reality of what was happening. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just trying to manipulate me financially. They were trying to discredit me publicly. They were painting me as a difficult old woman who'd turned against her own family, rather than acknowledging that I'd simply stopped allowing them to exploit me. The isolation was becoming real, though not in the way Megan described it. I was isolated because I'd finally seen through their manipulation and refused to participate in it any longer. I was isolated because I'd chosen dignity over dysfunction. But isolation, I was learning, wasn't necessarily loneliness. Mrs. Alvarez had been checking on me regularly since Robert's funeral, and our casual conversations had developed into genuine friendship. She was a widow herself, having lost her husband 3 years earlier, and she understood the challenges of navigating life alone after decades of partnership. You know, she said one afternoon as we sat on my front stoop sharing iced tea, I went through something similar with my daughter after Miguel died. What do you mean? The sweet concern that was really about money. The suggestions about what I should do with the house, how I should manage my finances, whether I was capable of living independently. It took me a while to realize she wasn't worried about me. She was worried about her inheritance. What did you do? I told her the truth, that my money was mine to spend as I saw fit, and that her future financial security was not my responsibility. It caused some tension for a while, but eventually she accepted it. And now? Now we have a much more honest relationship. She visits because she wants to see me, not because she's hoping to influence my decisions about money. Mrs. Alvarez's story gave me hope that my own family situation might eventually stabilize into something healthier. But it also made me realize that I needed to take more active steps to rebuild my life around relationships that weren't based on financial transactions. I started volunteering at the Brooklyn Public Library again, something I'd stopped doing during Robert's illness. I joined a senior hiking group that met in Prospect Park every Wednesday morning. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. For the first time in months, I was engaging with the world on my own terms, rather than simply responding to other people's demands and expectations. I was remembering who I was beyond the roles of wife, mother, and grandmother. I was Eleanor, a woman with her own interests and capabilities and dreams. The watercolor class was a revelation. I'd never considered myself artistic, but something about the way colors flowed and blended on paper spoke to me. My teacher, a patient woman named Sarah, who was probably 40 years younger than me, encouraged me to experiment and play, rather than worrying about creating perfect paintings. Art is about expression, she told me. It's about putting your inner world onto paper so other people can see it. My inner world, as it turned out, was full of vibrant blues and warm yellows, flowing landscapes and abstract emotions that I didn't have words for. I painted my memories of Robert, my grief over our lost partnership, my anger at my family's betrayal, and my growing sense of liberation. One afternoon, as I was working on a painting of the view from my bedroom window, another student named Margaret struck up a conversation. "You have such a peaceful energy," she said. "I can see it in your brushstrokes." Peaceful. That wasn't how I would have described myself a few months earlier, when I was constantly anxious about my family's demands and my own financial security. But she was right. Despite all the turmoil of the past year, I was beginning to feel peaceful. "I think I'm finally learning to live for myself," I told her. "That's not always easy at our age. There are so many people who think they know what's best for us." Margaret was 72, recently divorced after a 45-year marriage. Her situation was different from mine, but she understood the challenge of establishing independence later in life. "My children kept telling me I should give their father another chance," she said. "They couldn't understand that I was happier alone than I'd been in decades of marriage." "Do they accept your decision now?" "Some do, some don't. But I've learned that I can't live my life based on other people's approval, even my own children." That conversation stayed with me as I walked home through my familiar Brooklyn neighborhood. The tree-lined streets, the diverse mix of families and elderly residents, the corner bodega where the owner still remembered my name after all these years. This was my community, my life, my choice to make. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine from David. "Mom, it's me. I wanted to let you know that we're having a family barbecue this Saturday for Emma's 6th birthday. We'd really love for you to be there. I know things have been tense between us lately, but Emma keeps asking for her gamma. Please think about it." Emma's 6th birthday. I'd missed Emma's 5th birthday during all the turmoil following Robert's death and my growing awareness of the family's financial manipulation. The thought of missing another one made my heart ache, but I also knew this wasn't really about Emma's birthday. This was another attempt to draw me back into the emotional web that would make it easier for them to resume their financial manipulation. They were using my love for my grandchildren as leverage, just as they always had. I called David back that evening. "I'd love to celebrate Emma's birthday," I said. "Why don't I take her out for a special grandmother-granddaughter day instead? We could go to the zoo or the children's museum, just the two of us." There was a long pause. "Mom, that's very generous, but we were hoping you could come to the family celebration. Megan's been planning this for weeks." "I'm sure she has, but I think a one-on-one celebration would be more meaningful for Emma." "Actually, Mom, we need to talk about something, about your relationship with the kids." My stomach clenched. "What about it?" "Well, Megan and I have been concerned about some of the things you've been saying to Emma and Oliver, about money and family responsibilities. We think it's confusing for them." "What have I been saying that concerns you?" "You told Emma that she should ask us to budget for piano lessons instead of asking you to pay for them." "That's true. I did say that." "Mom, she's 5 years old. She doesn't understand budgets and family finances. When her grandmother tells her she can't have something she wants, it just makes her feel rejected." The emotional manipulation was so sophisticated it was almost admirable. They were telling me that enforcing reasonable financial boundaries was psychologically harmful to my grandchildren. "David, Emma needs to learn that she can't have everything she wants immediately. That's not rejection, that's education. That's not your decision to make. You're not her parent." "You're right. I'm not her parent. I'm her grandmother. And grandmothers are allowed to have their own relationships with their grandchildren without clearing every conversation through the parents. Not when those conversations undermine our authority. How does teaching a child about financial responsibility undermine your authority? Because you're essentially telling her that we don't manage our money properly, do you?" Another long pause. "Mom, I think we need to establish some boundaries about your interactions with Emma and Oliver." There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. Behave the way we want you to behave or lose access to your grandchildren. "What kind of boundaries?" I asked, though I already knew. "We think it would be best if visits were supervised for a while, until we can work through some of these family issues." Supervised visits. As if I were a danger to my own grandchildren. "David, are you seriously suggesting that I can't be trusted alone with Emma and Oliver?" "It's just temporary, Mom, until things get back to normal." Normal. Until I started writing checks again and stopped insisting on my own autonomy. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course, take all the time you need. But in the meantime, we think it's best if you don't contact the kids directly." After I hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, staring at the family photographs that covered my mantelpiece. Pictures of David as a baby, as a child, as a young man. Pictures of his wedding to Megan. Pictures of Emma and Oliver at various ages and stages. When had love become so complicated? When had family relationships become negotiations about access and control? When had my devotion to my son and grandchildren been transformed into a weapon that could be used against me? The answer, I realized, was gradual. It had happened so slowly that I'd never noticed the transformation. A small request here, a reasonable explanation there, a subtle implication that my love should be demonstrated through financial support. Over the years, these small manipulations had accumulated into a system of emotional and financial control that I'd mistaken for normal family dynamics. But now that I could see the system clearly, I had a choice. I could submit to it, accepting supervised visits and financial exploitation in exchange for limited access to my grandchildren. Or I could refuse to participate, knowing that this choice might cost me the relationships I valued most. It was the hardest decision I'd ever faced. The next morning, I called Harold and asked him to draft a letter to David and Megan. I want them to understand that supervised visits are not acceptable to me, I told him. I want them to know that using my grandchildren as leverage is emotionally abusive and legally questionable. Eleanor, are you prepared for the possibility that they might cut off your access to Emma and Oliver entirely? I don't know, but I'm not prepared to accept being treated as a potential threat to children I've loved and cared for since the day they were born. Harold drafted a carefully worded letter that established my legal rights as a grandparent, while also making it clear that I would not submit to supervision or manipulation. He sent copies to David and Megan and also filed copies with the court in case future legal action became necessary. The response came quickly. David called that same afternoon, his voice tight with anger. Mom, I can't believe you got lawyers involved in this. We're trying to work things out as a family, and you're treating us like criminals. I'm protecting my rights as a grandmother and as an individual. Nothing more. By threatening legal action? By documenting my position in case legal action becomes necessary. Do you realize how much this is hurting Emma and Oliver? They don't understand why Gamma is fighting with Mommy and Daddy. I'm not fighting with anyone, David. I'm simply refusing to be manipulated or controlled. Is that really what you think we're doing? Yes, that's exactly what I think you're doing. There was a long silence. Mom, I think you need to talk to someone, a counselor or therapist. This paranoia and hostility isn't like you. Paranoia and hostility. The same narrative Megan had been spreading at her book club. David, I've had a complete medical and psychological evaluation. Dr. Richards says I'm in excellent mental health. Dr. Richards is 80 years old. Maybe you need a younger doctor with more current knowledge about elderly mental health. The suggestion that I needed a different doctor, one who might be more susceptible to their influence, was chilling. My doctor is fine, thank you. Mom, we love you. We want what's best for you. But you're making decisions that are going to isolate you from everyone who cares about you. The only people I'm isolating myself from are people who see me as a source of money, rather than as a person worthy of respect. That's not fair. It's completely fair. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing, without asking for money or trying to influence my financial decisions? David couldn't answer that question. When was the last time Megan visited me without assessing my furniture or making suggestions about downsizing? He couldn't answer that one either. David, I love you. I love Megan and Emma and Oliver, but I won't be manipulated anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect, not financial transactions. And if we can't accept those terms? The question hung in the air between us. He was asking me to choose between my dignity and my family. Then I guess we'll all have to live with the consequences, I said quietly. After that conversation, the silence from my family became total. No phone calls, no visits, no contact of any kind. It was as if they had written me off completely, which I suppose they had. The loneliness was intense at first. I'd wake up in the morning expecting to hear from David, or see Megan's car in front of my house, or receive a drawing from Emma in the mail. When none of those things happened, the quiet felt oppressive. But gradually, I began to appreciate the peace. No more anxious phone calls about financial emergencies. No more carefully orchestrated visits designed to assess my vulnerability. No more conversations that started with pleasantries and ended with requests for money. Instead, I had conversations with Mrs. Alvarez about books and gardening. I had conversations with my art classmates about color theory and brush techniques. I had conversations with volunteers at the library about literacy programs and community events. I was discovering that I was interesting to people who didn't want anything from me except my company and conversation. I was witty and knowledgeable, and engaged with the world in ways I'd forgotten about during all those years of being reduced to a financial resource for my family. One afternoon, about 3 months after my last conversation with David, I was working in my small garden when I noticed a woman standing on the sidewalk, apparently trying to get my attention. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair and familiar green eyes. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Morrison?" "Yes, I am. I'm Julie, David's cousin, Robert's nephew's daughter." I remembered Julie from family gatherings when she was a child, though I hadn't seen her in years. "Julie, what a nice surprise. What brings you to Brooklyn?" "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you. Would you have a few minutes?" I invited her into my house and made tea, curious about what had prompted this unexpected visit. "I need to apologize to you," she said, once we were settled in my living room. "What for?" "For believing the stories David and Megan have been telling about you." My heart sank. "What kind of stories?" "That you've become paranoid and suspicious since Uncle Robert died, that you've turned against the family and won't help with reasonable requests, that you're probably developing dementia and shouldn't be living alone." The character assassination was even more extensive than I'd realized. "And what made you stop believing those stories?" Julie smiled ruefully. "David asked me for money last week. Said it was a temporary loan to help with some business expenses, but that his usual source of family funding had dried up." "Ah, he made it sound like you'd been supporting them for years and had suddenly become unreasonably stingy. But when I asked him about repayment terms, he got vague and defensive. It reminded me of conversations I'd had with him before, when he'd borrowed money and never paid it back." "You've loaned him money too?" "A few $1,000s over the years, always for emergencies that turned out to be less urgent than he claimed." Julie and I talked for over an hour about David's pattern of financial manipulation, which apparently extended far beyond his relationship with me. She'd heard similar stories from other family members who'd been approached for loans that were never repaid. "The thing is, Aunt Eleanor, everyone knows David has a good job, and Megan has her own business. They're not poor, but they act like they're constantly on the edge of financial disaster. Because it works," I said. "People want to help family members in crisis. But you figured it out." "It took me a while, and it cost me my relationship with my grandchildren." Julie was quiet for a moment. "That's actually the other reason I wanted to see you. Emma and Oliver miss you." "How do you know?" "I babysat for them last weekend while David and Megan went to some work function. Emma kept asking when she was going to see Gamma again. She said Mommy told her that Gamma was sick and couldn't have visitors right now. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They were telling my grandchildren that I was too sick to see them, rather than acknowledging that they'd cut off contact as a form of emotional blackmail." "Oliver asked if you were going to die like Grandpa Robert," Julie continued. "It was heartbreaking. The cruelty of using my grandchildren's fear and confusion as part of their manipulation was breathtaking. Emma and Oliver weren't just leverage in their campaign to control me. They were victims of their parents' dishonesty." "Julie, I want you to know that I'm not sick. I had a complete medical evaluation a few months ago, and I'm in excellent health, both physically and mentally." "I figured as much. You seem sharper and more engaged than you have in years. Then why do you think David and Megan are telling people I'm developing dementia?" "Because it supports their narrative that you're not capable of making your own decisions about money." Julie left after promising to stay in touch, and her visit clarified something important for me. The battle with my family wasn't just about my own autonomy and dignity. It was about truth versus manipulation, honesty versus exploitation. David and Megan weren't just trying to control me. They were actively deceiving other people about my mental state and their own motivations. They were building a case for taking control of my assets by portraying me as an incompetent elderly woman who'd turned against her own family. The next morning, I called Patricia and Harold and asked them to meet with me together. "I want to make sure my estate planning is bulletproof," I told them. "And I want to document everything that's been happening with my family, in case they try to claim I'm not mentally competent." We spent 3 hours going through every detail of the financial manipulation I'd experienced over the years. Harold took notes while Patricia reviewed my investment portfolio and overall financial situation. "Eleanor, you have substantial assets," Patricia said. "Your house, your investment portfolio, your various pension and Social Security income streams. You're worth well over $1 million. $1 million! I'd never thought of myself as wealthy, but the numbers didn't lie. "That's a lot of money for people to fight over," Harold observed. "And it's enough to motivate some pretty sophisticated manipulation tactics." "Which is exactly what we've been seeing," I said. Harold drafted a comprehensive legal document that established my mental competency, detailed the history of financial manipulation I'd experienced, and clearly stated my intentions regarding my estate. He also prepared a healthcare directive that prevented anyone from making medical decisions on my behalf without clear evidence of my incapacity. "This should protect you from anyone who tries to claim you're not capable of managing your own affairs," he said. But Eleanor, you need to understand that determined people might still try to challenge your competency, especially if significant money is involved. What can I do to prevent that? Continue to live independently and engage actively with the world. Maintain relationships with people who can attest to your mental sharpness. Keep detailed records of your financial decisions and the reasoning behind them. Basically, continue to demonstrate that you're a competent adult making rational choices about your own life. That's exactly what I intended to do. Over the following months, I threw myself into building a life that was rich and fulfilling on my own terms. I traveled to a small coastal town on Long Island for a week-long painting retreat. I volunteered to teach literacy classes at the library. I joined a book club and a hiking group and a community garden project. I also began to spend my money on things that brought me joy. I redecorated my living room with bright colors and comfortable furniture. I hired a cleaning service so I could spend more time on activities I enjoyed rather than household chores. I bought myself a small car so I wouldn't have to rely on public transportation or taxis. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living rather than just surviving. The breakthrough came on a crisp October afternoon when I was leaving my watercolor class. I'd just finished a painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, and I was feeling proud of how much my technique had improved over the months. As I walked to my car, I heard a small voice call out, "Gamma!" I turned and saw Emma running toward me. Her face lit up with joy. Behind her, I could see David getting out of his car with the expression of resignation. Emma threw herself into my arms, and I held her tight, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo and feeling her small body warm against mine. "I missed you so much, Gamma," she whispered. "I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you can imagine." David approached slowly, his hands in his pockets. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, David. Emma saw you from the car and, well, I couldn't keep driving without stopping. I'm glad you didn't." We stood there for a moment, Emma still in my arms, David and I looking at each other across months of silence and hurt. "How are you?" he asked finally. "I'm very well. How are you?" We're managing." I wanted to ask about the house they'd supposedly had to sell, about the financial crisis that had required $50,000, about all the lies and manipulations of the past year. But Emma was listening, and this wasn't the time for adult confrontations. "Where's Oliver?" I asked instead. "At soccer practice. Emma came with me to run errands." "I see. And how is Megan?" David's expression tightened slightly. "She's fine," but something in his voice suggested that she wasn't entirely fine, that perhaps the family dynamics had shifted in ways I didn't yet understand. "Gamma, can you come to my house and see my new room?" Emma asked. "Mommy painted it purple, and I have new bookshelves." I looked at David, waiting for him to deny the request or insist on supervised visits. Instead, he said quietly, "You're welcome to come see it, if you'd like." It wasn't an enthusiastic invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was a tentative offer of connection from someone who seemed as emotionally exhausted as I felt. "I'd love to see your new room," I told Emma, "but maybe we should plan it for another day, when Oliver can be there too." "This weekend?" Emma asked hopefully. I looked at David again. He nodded slowly. "This weekend would be nice," I said. After they drove away, I sat in my car for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. The reunion I'd longed for but hadn't dared to expect. The tentative possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship with my family. But I also knew that nothing fundamental had changed. David and Megan still needed to acknowledge the damage they'd caused and demonstrate genuine respect for my autonomy. I still needed to protect myself from financial manipulation and emotional exploitation. The difference was that now I knew I could survive without them, if necessary. I'd built a life that was meaningful and fulfilling on my own terms. I had friends, activities, interests, and financial security that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or assistance. That knowledge gave me a strength I'd never had before in dealing with my family. I could engage with them from a position of choice rather than desperation, love rather than need. Saturday arrived, and I drove to David and Megan's house with a mixture of anticipation and wariness. It was the first time I'd been there since before Robert's death, and I was curious to see what changes had been made. The house looked the same from the outside, which surprised me given their claims about financial difficulties. I'd half expected to see signs of downsizing or distress. David answered the door, and his greeting was warm but careful. "Hi, Mom. Come in. Emma's been talking about your visit all week." The interior of the house also looked unchanged. Same expensive furniture, same artwork on the walls, same general sense of upper-middle-class comfort. Either they'd resolved their financial crisis through some means other than my assistance, or the crisis had never been as severe as they'd claimed. Emma and Oliver ran to greet me, and their obvious joy at seeing me again melted some of the protective walls I'd built around my heart. Whatever their parents' faults, These children loved me genuinely and unconditionally. Gamma, look! Emma grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the stairs. I want to show you my purple room. We spent an hour touring the children's rooms, looking at school projects and art supplies and all the accumulated treasures of childhood. Oliver showed me his soccer trophies, and Emma demonstrated a new dance she'd learned in ballet class. It was exactly the kind of visit I'd dreamed about during all those months of forced separation. Natural, joyful, focused on the children's lives and interests rather than adults' financial concerns. Megan appeared as we were heading back downstairs, and her greeting was polite but distinctly cool. "Hello, Eleanor. You look well." "Thank you. So do you." There was an awkward pause, both of us apparently uncertain how to navigate this first conversation since our confrontation about David's supposed investment crisis. "Can I get you something to drink?" Megan asked finally. "That would be nice." We sat in the living room while the children played in the backyard, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "David told me you two ran into each other at Emma's art class," Megan said carefully. "That's right. The children have missed you. I've missed them too." Another pause. "Eleanor, I want you to know that we never intended for things to get so complicated. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that things had gone wrong." "I'm sure you didn't," I said diplomatically. "We were just trying to plan for the future, to make sure everyone was taken care of. Everyone, meaning them, not me. I understand. But planning for my future needs to be my responsibility, not yours." Megan's jaw tightened slightly. "Of course. We just thought, given your age and Robert's death, that you might appreciate some help with the more complex decisions. Complex decisions, like whether to sign over my house or how to spend my money. I appreciate the concern, but I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." We danced around the real issues for another few minutes, both of us trying to be civil for the children's sake while avoiding the topics that had caused our rift. Finally, David joined us, and the conversation turned to safer subjects: the children's schools, neighborhood changes, local politics. We were all working hard to create a sense of normalcy, but the underlying tensions remained unresolved. As I prepared to leave, Emma hugged me tightly and asked when I would visit again. "Soon, I hope," I said, looking at David. He nodded. "You're always welcome here, Mom. Always welcome. But on what terms?" I drove home with mixed feelings. Joy at reconnecting with Emma and Oliver, but wariness about David and Megan's true motivations. They seemed to be offering reconciliation, but I suspected they were still hoping to eventually regain control over my financial resources. The next few weeks brought regular phone calls from David and occasional visits with the children. The contact was pleasant but superficial, focused on immediate family activities rather than deeper relationship issues. Then, in early November, David called with news that clarified everything. "Mom, I have something to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me rather than through the neighborhood grapevine." "What is it?" "Megan and I are getting divorced." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "David, I'm so sorry. It's been coming for a while. Since around the time of our last big conversation with you, actually." "What happened?" There was a long pause. "A lot of things. But one of the main issues was disagreement about how we treated you." "What kind of disagreement?" "Megan thought we should continue pressuring you to make certain financial decisions. She believed we had a right to influence how you managed your assets, given that we were your primary heirs." "And you disagreed?" "Eventually, yes. It took me a while to understand what we'd been doing to you, how manipulative and disrespectful it was. But once I saw it clearly, I couldn't continue participating." I was stunned. David was acknowledging the financial manipulation I'd experienced, something he'd denied completely just a few months earlier. "What changed your mind?" "Several things. Talking to other family members who'd had similar experiences with Megan's financial strategies, seeing how our conflict with you was affecting Emma and Oliver, and honestly, some therapy sessions that helped me understand family dynamics better." "You've been in therapy?" "Both couples therapy and individual therapy. The couples therapy didn't save our marriage, but the individual therapy has been helpful for understanding some patterns in my own behavior." We talked for over an hour, and David gradually revealed the full scope of what had been happening in his marriage and his own growing awareness of the damage they'd caused. "Mom, I need to apologize to you for the financial manipulation, for the threats about supervised visits, for allowing Megan to spread rumors about your mental health. All of it was wrong, and I'm sorry." It was the apology I'd been waiting for, but it felt complicated rather than simply satisfying. I was glad David had gained insight into their behavior, but I was also sad that it had taken a divorce for him to see clearly. "I appreciate your apology, David, but I need to know that you understand the damage that was done to our relationship." "I do understand, and I know it's going to take time to rebuild the trust I destroyed. What about Emma and Oliver? How are they handling the divorce? It's hard for them, of course, but in some ways, they're relieved that the tension in the house is gone, and they're excited about the prospect of spending more time with you. Over the following months, as David and Megan worked through their divorce proceedings, I began to rebuild my relationship with my son and grandchildren. It was slow going at first, marked by careful conversations and tentative gestures of trust. David moved into a smaller apartment closer to my neighborhood, which made it easier for spontaneous visits. Emma and Oliver spent weekends with him, and I often joined them for Sunday dinners or trips to the park. Gradually, I began to see signs of the man David had been before his marriage to Megan, before financial pressures and materialistic ambitions had distorted his values. He was more relaxed with the children, more present in conversations, more honest about his own mistakes and struggles. "I've been thinking about what drove me to treat you the way I did," he said one Sunday afternoon as we watched Emma and Oliver play on the swings at Prospect Park. "What conclusions have you reached?" "I think I became so focused on providing for my family's future that I lost sight of what family actually means. I started seeing relationships as financial transactions rather than connections based on love and respect." "What about now?" "Now I'm trying to be a better person and a better father. I'm trying to teach Emma and Oliver that family is about more than money and material security." "And Megan?" David's expression darkened. "Megan is Megan." The divorce settlement included significant financial provisions for the children, but she's already started asking for additional support for various unexpected expenses. Some patterns don't change. I was sorry to hear that Megan hadn't learned from the experience, but I was relieved that David seemed committed to protecting his children from her financial manipulation. As Christmas approached, David asked if I'd like to host a holiday dinner for him and the children. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I asked. "It's been a difficult year for all of us." "I think it would be healing," he said. "A chance to create new memories in a healthier environment." I agreed, and spent weeks planning a celebration that would focus on family connection rather than expensive gifts or elaborate displays. I decorated my house with simple, beautiful touches that reminded me of Christmas mornings from David's childhood. I prepared traditional foods that carried memories of happier times. On Christmas Day, David arrived with Emma and Oliver, all of them carrying small, thoughtfully chosen gifts. Emma had painted me a picture of our house, complete with the small garden where I spent so many peaceful hours. Oliver had written me a story about a grandmother who was the wisest and kindest person in the world. "These are the most beautiful gifts I've ever received," I told them truthfully. We spent the day cooking together, playing board games, and sharing stories about Christmases past. For the first time in over a year, I felt like I was truly part of a family again. But the best gift came as we were cleaning up after dinner. David pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "It's a start," he said quietly. Inside the envelope was a check for $5,000 and a handwritten note. "Mom, this represents the first installment on repaying the money I borrowed from you over the years. I know it's not nearly enough, and I know money can't undo the damage I caused to our relationship, but I want you to know that I recognize my debts, both financial and emotional. I love you, and I'm committed to earning back your trust. David." I looked at the check, then at my son, and felt something shift inside my chest. The gesture wasn't about the money itself. It was about acknowledgement, responsibility, and respect. "David, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You gave me so much over the years, and I treated it like it was my right rather than your generosity. I need to make that right. The most important thing you can give me is an honest relationship with you and the children. You have that. But you also deserve to have your financial sacrifice acknowledged and repaid." As I write this today, 6 months later, I'm sitting in my sunny living room, looking out at the small garden where I grow tomatoes and herbs and flowers that exist simply because they bring me joy. The walls are painted in colors I chose, decorated with artwork I love, filled with furniture that reflects my own taste rather than someone else's expectations. David and I talk every few days now. Conversations that range from practical matters to deep discussions about life and values and what it means to be a family. He's repaid about half of the money he borrowed over the years. But more importantly, he's repaid my trust through consistent, honest, respectful behavior. Emma and Oliver visit regularly, and their presence fills my house with laughter and energy. We paint together, garden together, read books together, and create the kind of memories that aren't for sale at any price. Megan remains largely absent from our lives, though she occasionally surfaces with new financial demands or attempts to influence the children's relationship with me. David has learned to recognize and deflect her manipulation, and I've learned to stay completely disengaged from her schemes. I travel now, something I never did during all those years when I was constantly responding to family crises and financial emergencies. I've been to art museums in Philadelphia, lighthouse tours in Maine, and wine tastings in upstate New York. Each trip reminds me that I'm more than someone's mother or grandmother or financial resource. I'm Eleanor, a woman with her own interests and capabilities and dreams. My house is worth more than ever. My investments continue to grow, and my retirement income provides comfortable security for whatever years I have left. But the real wealth in my life isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in authentic relationships, genuine respect, and the freedom to make my own choices about how I want to live. I think about Robert often, and I wish he could see how his warning about not being taken advantage of ultimately led me to reclaim my own life. I think he would be proud of the woman I've become in his absence. Strong enough to stand up for myself, wise enough to forgive without forgetting, and confident enough to build a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the confrontations with my family, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is both yes and no. I regret that it took me so many years to recognize manipulation for what it was. I regret that my grandchildren had to witness adult conflict and confusion. I regret that Megan never learned to value relationships over resources. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret refusing to be treated as a financial commodity. I don't regret insisting on dignity and respect in my relationships with people I love. The truth is, you can't love someone who doesn't respect you. You can enable them, support them, sacrifice for them, but until respect exists, genuine love is impossible. I learned that lesson at 75, but it's never too late to start valuing yourself accurately. My life now is quieter than it used to be, but it's also more authentic. I'm surrounded by people who enjoy my company for its own sake rather than for what I can provide them. I make decisions based on my own judgment rather than other people's pressure. I spend my money on things that bring me satisfaction rather than on other people's priorities. This is what freedom looks like at this stage of life. Not the absence of connection, but the presence of honest, mutually respectful relationships. Not isolation, but independence. Not selfishness, but appropriate self-care. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family love felt conditional on your financial support? Have you ever wondered whether you were being taken advantage of by people who claim to have your best interests at heart? If any of this sounds familiar, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships based on genuine affection rather than financial convenience. You deserve to have your own needs and dreams respected. You deserve to make your own decisions about how to live your life and spend your money. It's never too late to start advocating for yourself, even when the people you need to advocate against are the ones you love most. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced something similar? How did you handle it? If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important stories, and it lets me know that opening my heart was worth the vulnerability. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to trust you with something so personal and painful. And thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone in learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's manipulation.